which means the following. First of all, study things that could be studied, and do not study things that cannot be studied. But what are things that, I'm trying to cut down on jokes because we are running out of time. So what I've been saying are very serious, so don't laugh. We study facts, not value, for example. We don't study, for example, the odd question. Should we develop culture in West Kowloon? We cannot study that because that will give you endless debate. Is orange better tasting than apple? We cannot study that because that is about subjective taste. That is about vision. That is about long-term blueprint. They are about value questions. Value questions have no end. Don't study them. What you can study is how many people go to West Kowloon. How many people go to Film Archive? Who are they? Do they love to see films? Those are things that you can study. So first of all, separate facts and value. Discard the odd questions. 應唔應該做什麼? We don't study them because we can't study them. You can study habits, behavior, observables, countables. So first of all, be neutral. Isolate the facts and the value. And if you want to study the facts, try to be systematic. Before week 6, if you go to Wan Chai, before that you need to define clearly what do you want to research on. What are the key concepts that you have in mind? Define them clearly. For example, what is culture? Today in tutorial 1, we debate on what is culture. There are 3 definitions. You must zoom in on one clear-cut definition before you go on to the field. Because otherwise you will be contaminating the situation and be confused by the whole thing. So like the scientists, like the medical practitioners, you isolate certain factors, define them clearly, offer certain possible explanations, and then go on to examine the things as systematically as possible. And then lastly, try to be objective. Don't use your subjective judgment to say this is better culture, that is not so good culture. Try to study things with rigorous instruments. Gather data that are observable and at best countable. For example, the typical way to go about objective and systematic research would be to do a big sample survey, picking out, say, more than 1,000 people in Hong Kong with random sampling, and then use a clear-cut objective questionnaire survey to tap their views and habits on Hong Kong Film Archive, for example. This was the model I learned for the past 20 years, but this model has come up short, especially when we try to understand culture in the real world. So what I'm going to recommend to you for the rest of the course is to try to overturn that tradition and see how it could not be the best methodology for us to go on studying Blue House, Wan Chai, Sun Shui Po, and Circuit May. I would propose an anti-positivistic, or what we call an interpretist stance to doing cultural studies in the community. The starting point is the positivistic methodology is simply wrong for studying something we call culture. And it is wrong on 3 counts. So there are 3 inherent senses of culture that could not be tapped by this positivistic method. So some of you come from political science, some of you come from psychology. You would have a hard time digesting the following because it confounds all the practical conventions of, let's say, hard social sciences. Culture could not be studied by a questionnaire survey. Culture could not be studied by maintaining a hard and fast distinction between fact and value. And some would go on to say culture could not be studied so-called objectively. Being distant, being an expert, looking on from the outside into a community would be the safest way to fail in studying community and its culture. So there are 3 reasons why interpretism should be the main driving force, the main vision in forming what we shall do in our subsequent rounds of fieldwork. 3 reasons. First of all, culture. What is culture? Culture is actually a set of meanings that we need to look into rather than stay away. So let us take the example of true example really. Last week, one of my summer interns who practiced at Hong Kong FA, Hong Kong Film Archive, she did not watch a film before and think everything that goes back to the 1980s were old movies. So my student, Ms. Chen, went to Hong Kong Film Archive, who worked in films that stretch back to the 1900s, 1890s, and so on. She was ignorant of films before she worked there, and then she worked there for 1.5 months, and now becomes a film addict, looking into very ancient movies, like 1960s movies in Hong Kong, discovering a new continent. And then one day she asked me one question: why are young people like me not able to get in touch with Hong Kong Film Archive? What is wrong with young people today? Are they seeing too many Kelly Chans and then forget that there is a continent behind the 1980s? So she asked me that question, and she suggested to do a research there. How and why young people did not go to Hong Kong FA or visit museums or come into contact with arts in Hong Kong? What makes for the cultural lack in Hong Kong society? And she proposed it could be education, it could be class, it could be something. Try to identify certain factors that explain their non-appearance at Hong Kong FA. My answer to her is, don't try to answer this question in so simplistic, positivistic, and scientific way. Try to read Raymond Williams. Remember, in lecture 1 we read Raymond Williams. Culture is ordinary. What is culture? Raymond Williams started his article, if you remember, talking about a bus ride. I rode on a bus, and that bus leisurely went through the pastures of the Welsh countryside, and then went into village square. And then in that village square, I bumped into my grandfather. My grandfather was reading a book. Then he went into a pub. And then out come people from the pub who went to join the trade unions, debating on the action to be taken for the next strike, next collective action. Raymond Williams said that is culture. The bus ride, the countryside, the pub, the village square, the trade union. You can't understand how some person go or did not go to a museum if you do not find that person within that nexus of relations. Some person chose to go to a museum or not, depending on whether he had that sort of bus ride. What sort of countryside did he come from? In fact, the total life situation of that person defines the way of life of that person. And he or she chooses to do one thing or the other, depending on that whole nexus of relations and cultural conditions. So I suggested to my student, first of all, you need to ask what culture and art mean to young people. The key word there, of course, is mean. They did not go to Hong Kong Film Archive or did not go to the museums in Hong Kong because they mean or they do not mean something in the whole way of life of those young people. What you should do is not to identify isolated factors, but patiently go into the life of the young people, what they like and dislike, what makes them happy and unhappy, what a museum trip be happy inside the total everyday experience of that chap. If that chap takes a bus ride and then go to the countryside and feel very happy, why does he have to go to a museum in Oxford? So we have to put isolated acts of culture within a whole nexus of design, imaginations, everyday events, and everyday structures of feeling for Raymond Williams. And such feelings and likes and dislikes always occur in certain contexts, like they occur in family. Family members teach or influence them to like certain things or dislike certain things. They may want to read yes because they hate school. School always said no to yes. That is why there's smuggle yes inside school. You can't understand the meaning of yes without understanding the school regime that regulates all kinds of circulation